If there was ever a riff that perfectly blurred the lines between rhythm and lead playing, that's it. Couldn't Stand the Weather by Stevie Ray Vaughan. I think it's harder to authentically replicate the groove and overall feel of that riff than it is to do the same for, say, Scuttle Buttin, which I guess is commonly thought of as Stevie's most challenging riff to learn. But I've seen loads of amazing Scuttle Buttin covers on YouTube over the years, but I've not seen many covers of Couldn't Stand the Weather that sound close to the original, and I'm including myself in that. I try my best to do it, but it is really hard to authentically replicate the groove and overall feel of that riff. I'm sure there are a ton of lessons on YouTube that will take you through this riff note for note, and I'm not about to do the same. What I am going to do though is break down what makes it such a great riff to learn as a guitar player, because learning and studying something like this is going to develop skills that you will be able to use in other funky riffs that you learn and play or even write yourself. The tone that I'm getting in this video is courtesy of the Texan Twang from Pedal Pawn, who are the sponsor of today's video. Use code ROSS10 at checkout to get 10% off your order if you want to grab one of these for yourself, and I'll have more to say on the pedal itself later on in the video. So let's get started by listening to the riff in question a couple of times, once to tempo and then played slow. There are a few things going on in this riff that are all important to pay attention to if you want to learn this riff and be able to play it somewhat cleanly, which is the main challenge. And these are things that when put into practice will make you a better funk rhythm player. And these include two types of string muting, selective strumming, string rakes, double stops or even triple stops, and fretting notes with your thumb. So if we take a look at how this riff opens, we have a few octaves that we strum on the G and high E strings, followed by a double stop on the G and B strings. As soon as I strum the last of those octaves, I lift my fingers up so that they're no longer fretting notes, but they are still just gently resting on the strings. So pay close attention to my fretting hand now to see the slightest bit of movement from these fingers when they lift up almost off the strings, but not entirely. They're still just resting gently on them. I do the same thing for the double stop on the G and B strings, so let me add that in now, and again pay close attention to my fretting hand, my index finger in particular, because I'm going to lift it up very slightly so that it's just resting on the strings but not fretting the notes. Muting the strings like that, I mean, it looks like nothing. You probably wouldn't have even noticed it if I hadn't pointed it out, but it makes a huge difference to the overall sound of that part of the riff in particular. So let me just play it without lifting my fingers off the notes as soon as I've played them, so that you can hear the difference in sound. Okay, so there I wasn't lifting the fingers up to mute the strings, but now I'm going to add that in. Okay, so this is how you want it to sound versus no muting. When I add in the mutes, you can hear that the notes are more separated and punctuated. The other way in which I am muting notes here is with my thumb, my middle and third fingers. So notice how my thumb, well, my hand is gripping the neck in a way so that my thumb is resting on top of that low E string. Now that's for a couple of different reasons. One is that I am actually going to fret notes with my thumb later on in the riff, but when I'm not fretting notes, my thumb acts as a good mute for that low E string. And then my middle and third fingers, they are just kind of lying diagonally across the strings, lying on the A and D strings to mute them as well. So if I didn't have my thumb resting against the low E and I didn't have these two fingers covering the A and D strings, if I accidentally hit those strings, then it would sound like this. which is obviously not a desirable sound. Now, another thing that is going to help me to keep things clean here is a technique that I'm calling selective strumming. And this is when I am aiming to only strum the strings on which I am playing fretted notes. So in this part of the riff, that's the G, B, and high E strings. So the mutes on these strings that I just demonstrated, I'm thinking of those as a safeguard. If I hit those strings, it's not going to sound terrible, but if I just strum all of the strings right now, you're going to hear those dead notes, those dead strings in the mix, which you'd like to avoid, you know? If you could remove that, it would sound better, and you can remove that by selectively strumming the strings. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to angle my picking hand, or my strumming hand rather, so that I'm only hitting or only aiming to hit those top three strings, the G, B, and E strings. And when I'm doing this, I'm sure that I am at some points, you know, grazing the D string as well, but it certainly sounds better than aiming to hit all 6 strings at once and thinking, well, I've got these strings muted, so it doesn't matter if I hit them. It does matter if you hit them, because without them, it sounds a lot more clean. So why not make a basic exercise out of that very first part of the riff so that you can practice both the selective strumming, the muting of the fretted notes as soon as you've played them, and the mutes on the bottom 3 strings with your thumb, middle, and third fingers. Maybe something like this would be a good thing to practice. If you're a fan of the tone that I'm getting in this video, I am using the Texan Twang from Pedal Pawn, which is quite a bit different to any other drive pedal in my collection because it doesn't actually have a drive or gain control on it. All it has is a level control and a 3-way selector switch for high, mid, and low. Just looking at the aesthetic of this pedal and obviously the name as well, you can tell right away who this is aimed at. You know, SRV fans like you and I who want a convenient way of capturing his gritty yet glassy Strat tone. Now, I never use real amps in my videos, so my setup for today is I've got the Texan Twang running into the front of my Line 6 HX Stomp XL, and the preset that I've got is based on a Fender Twin, an Own Hammer 2x12 IR. I think it's based on a Bogner cab, if I'm not mistaken. I've also got some spring reverb, and I have a noise gate running at the minute, but I'll just turn that off. So that preset on its own, without the Texan Twang engaged, sounds like this. Now I've got the Texan Twang on the high setting currently, which is what I've used for recording all of the tones in this video. So let's just kick that in and see what it sounds like. So that was with the volume knob on my guitar turned all the way up. However, I think that the real magic of this pedal, of the Texan Twang, is to do with how it interacts with the volume knob on your guitar. So if you turn it down to around 6 or 7, you get these beautifully, like, crystal clear clean tones that have a bit of bite and edge to them. It's very reminiscent of Stevie Ray Vaughan's clean tone, even if I turn it up a bit higher to like 7 or 8. So for all the times that you heard me play the Couldn't Stand the Weather riff in this video, I was recording it using the Texan twang on the high setting with the level around noon going into the preset that I just described with position 4 on the Strat, and my volume was kind of between 6 and 7 on the volume control on my guitar. And there are two other settings on that three-way selector switch, of course. The high setting that I have it on currently, that's described as like a sort of glassy, bitey sound. The mid setting, I think it's described as fat/tube, so let's take a listen to that. Real quick, I'll just play full volume so you can hear the real difference between all of them. I'll switch to the neck pickup for this. So this is the high setting, full volume on the Strat with the Texan twang. Okay, let's switch to the mid setting. Bit more of a throaty sound there. Let's roll off the volume and see if we still get some of that sparkliness that you get, that we heard on the high setting anyway. Okay, now let's go full volume again and we'll switch to the low setting. This one I've found to sound almost like a fuzz, certainly with the volume all the way up on the guitar. So let's take a listen to that. Again, let's roll down the volume, see if we still get some of that glassy, clean sound. So yeah, it's still there, even though that on full volume sounds, you know, like I said, a bit closer to a fuzz. Listen to how beautifully that cleans up. It's a lovely, like, full, fat, clean tone there. So that's the Texan twang from Pedal Pawn. Thank you to Chris from Pedal Pawn for sending it over and for sponsoring today's video. If you want to grab one for yourself, there's a link in the description box beneath the video. Use code ROSS10 at checkout for 10% off your order. Let's get back to the lesson. Moving on to another technique that appears a lot throughout this riff, and that is string rakes. That's just strumming dead notes. This happens a lot throughout the main Couldn't Stand the Weather riff, and just to demonstrate what this actually adds to the funkiness of this riff, I'm going to attempt to play it now without any string rakes, and then I'm going to add them in so you can hear exactly what it is that it's adding to the riff. So I'll give this a shot. I'm not even sure if I can do this, but we'll try. Okay, so that's what it would sound like without, I don't think I played any string rakes there. I could be wrong if I go and watch this back later, but let's add them in now so that you can hear how the riff should actually sound. That's quite a big difference, so you'll want to practice adding those in, and you know, that was part of that little exercise that I just showed you there. Just strumming those dead strings, those muted strings. And a quick tip for adding a bit more funkiness to that is to place accents on, like, say, every first or every fourth note. So rather than having them all be the exact same dynamic, place more emphasis on one out of every 4 string rakes. And to give another example of a player who uses this kind of technique very often in his playing, think of Nile Rodgers. This is all over chic songs and any song with Nile Rodgers on it, really. Now, we've already had one double stop in this riff so far, right at the start on the G and B strings. But there's a lot of them throughout this riff, and in fact, a lot of them are triple stops. So, in case you don't know, a double stop is just simply playing two notes at the one time on strings that sit directly opposite each other. For example, the G and B string. And these are often barred across one fret with one finger. So you can probably guess what a triple stop is. It's playing three notes on adjacent strings at the one time, and often barring those notes. So I just played them there, but we have a couple of triple stops in this riff. One at fret 12 on the G, B and high E strings, and one at fret 10. Now, these appear soon after the first part of the riff that we just looked at with the octaves and the double stop on the G and B strings. And as you can see, I'm slightly bending the triple stop on the 12th fret. So here's an exercise you could use to practice getting familiar with double and triple stops on these strings. Now, one of the most difficult parts in this riff, or the most difficult part in this riff, comes right after those double stops, and it involves a double stop played on the G and B strings, but on different frets, as well as a fretted note, fret 10, on the low E string that you're fretting with your thumb. So here's what it goes like. So I'm going 12 on the D string, down an octave to fret 10 on the low E, which I'm fretting with my thumb, and then I'm sliding into a little tritone there. That is the flat 7th and major 3rd in a C sharp dominant 7th chord. Sliding into those notes from one fret below. And I'm doing all of that whilst keeping my thumb anchored around the 10th fret. To play this comfortably, I find that I have to rotate my wrist when I go to play the notes that I'm sliding from. So what that means is, for the most part, throughout this riff, my hand is positioned in a way so that my palm is facing pretty much where like the neck meets the body of the guitar. That's the direction that my palm is facing for the most part. But from watching videos of Stevie play this live, his hand position when he goes to play that part, it doesn't really move. I mean, it seems like his thumb is kind of locked in position there, but obviously has to do a bit of movement to play those notes. So when I try to play those notes without rotating my wrist, I get a lot of discomfort in my wrist and just this general area of my hand. It doesn't feel very nice. So to get around that discomfort, I found that I can do it by rotating my wrist so that it's no longer facing the back of the guitar in line with the neck. It's now facing the ceiling. So I'm rotating my wrist so that it faces the ceiling when I go to play the notes at fret 9 on the D string and fret 10 on the G string. And then when I play the actual slide into those chord tones, notice how my wrist rotates back so that my palm returns to facing the back of the guitar and no longer the ceiling. So here's a simple exercise that you can practice to get used to having your thumb locked in this position at fret 10 and then also sliding between those two double stops. So all of the techniques that we've covered in this lesson are things that when put into practice will make your funk rhythm playing so much better. So to recap, we had two different types of muting. One where you play a fretted note and then lift your finger up slightly so that it's still resting on the string and muting it, but not applying enough pressure to still fret the note. The other type of muting was with our thumb, middle and third fingers just resting on unwanted strings that we wouldn't want to accidentally hit and then hear an open string. We also had selective strumming, which is where you angle your picking hand so that you only go to strum the strings on which you are actually playing notes. And in addition to that, we had string rakes, so just strumming dead muted strings back and forth. We had double stops and triple stops, and we had fretting notes with the thumb and muting notes with the thumb as well. If you learned something new from watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more. If you're new here, my name is Campbell. Welcome to my channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.